Hello everyone. Welcome back to our AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate Certification Bootcamp. Today we are diving into a service that's absolutely essential for building high performance applications, Amazon ElastiCache. On behalf of Cloud Expert Solutions team, I would like to thank you for joining us and exploring this video. In this video, we'll dive into Amazon's ElastiCache, covering everything from how to use it as in-memory cache or its role as session store. We'll also compare two popular open source in-memory cache engines, that is Redis and Memcached, and answer the age-old question of which one is the best for your need. Plus, we'll explore ElastiCache's security feature, use cases, and caching patterns. If you'll follow this video without skipping any content, you will be well prepared for your certification exam. Let's get started. At its core, Amazon ElastiCache is a fully managed in-memory caching service. Its job is to provide ultra-fast data access with sub-millisecond latency by allowing you to retrieve information from a fast in-memory data store instead of a slower disk-based database. You can choose between two popular open source engines, Redis and Memcached. There is one more new engine available in AWS Management Console. However, AWS Certification Course Curriculum does not include that new engine yet. By using a cache, you offload the heavy lifting of your primary database, which reduces latency and improves application performance. Using Amazon ElastiCache, you can externalize user sessions or temporary data and convert your application a stateless one. We'll review that in a later slide. The great part is that since it's a managed service, AWS handles all the operational risk like provisioning, patching, monitoring, and backups for you. ElastiCache is designed to automatically maintain high availability and provides a 99.99% availability SLA. There is no upfront investment required and you pay only for the resources you use. Now let's review Amazon ElastiCache deployment options. When you create an ElastiCache cluster, you have two key deployment options. First, the provisioned or self-designed options, which gives you fine-grained control. You mainly choose the node type, size, and the scaling strategy. You can also configure auto-scaling policies on your provisioned cluster. You pay per hour basis for each node and no upfront payment is required. This mode is ideal for workloads with predictable traffic pattern where you can forecast capacity requirements. The second option, which is a game changer for many, and the second option is ElastiCache Serverless. With Serverless, you simply provide a cache name and AWS handles all the provisioning and scaling automatically. It instantly scales to meet your application's demand without any downtime, and it offers a pay-per-use pricing model. This is perfect for workloads that are new, unpredictable, or where you prefer to focus on your application rather managing infrastructure. One of the most common uses for ElastiCache is database caching. Let's look at a typical architecture using the lazy loading pattern. This works for both provisioned and serverless caches. Let's assume a user's request comes to our application. The application first checks ElastiCache to see if the requested data is already in the cache. If it is, we have a cache hit and the data is returned in milliseconds. Now, if the data is not in the cache, which is called a cache miss, the application then queries the primary database to retrieve the data. Once retrieved, the application writes it back to ElastiCache for future request before returning it to user. This approach is fantastic for read-heavy workloads where the goal is to reduce the load on your database. Another critical use case is managing user sessions. This is especially important for modern distributed web applications. And before that, let's understand the horizontal scaling problem for a stateful web application using this application architecture diagram. When a user's first request land on the application load balancer, the load balancer will forward the user request to any one of the backend server's node based on the routing policy. Post a successful user authentication, a user session will be established with that server node and user will get a response. Now any subsequent request from that same user has a high probability of landing on a different backend node. However, as the application is stateful, subsequent request will attempt to utilize the previously established user session and that user session is missing in the new node. As a result, the request will not be processed successfully and every request must contain logging information or other user preferences. We can resolve this challenge by implementing a centralized session store using ElastiCache. By moving your session data like user logins or shopping cart contents to a centralized ElastiCache cluster. With this architecture, your application will write or retrieve user sessions from the centralized store before processing any user request. Your web server now can become truly stateless and you can then place them behind a load balancer and scale them out or in independently, making your application much more scalable and resilient. This is a great use case for Redis, especially with the multi-AZ and persistence feature available for Redis. So how do you choose between Redis and Memcached? It depends on your application's need. Let's compare the key difference side by side. Redis is a feature-rich, single-threaded cache engine. It offers complex data structures like list, sets, and sorted sets. Redis supports durable AOF persistence with snapshot-driven backup and restore capability. And Redis provides robust high availability with multi-AZ replication. Redis is ideal if you want to create a centralized session storage for a stateful application or game leaderboards, queues, or for pub/sub messaging use cases. Memcached, on the other hand, is a multi-threaded. It's simpler and it's designed for pure high-speed object caching. The multi-threaded capability can be advantageous for scaling compute-intensive operation. And for the exam, please remember, if you need persistent, complex data types or high availability with automatic failover, then Redis is your answer. But if you have a simple, non-persistent, multi-threaded object cache, then Memcached is the right tool. Please remember the mapping and the keyword multi-threaded. Multi-threaded is for Memcached. Now let's review Amazon ElastiCache security features. Security is a paramount and ElastiCache offers several features to protect your data. First, always deploy your cluster within a virtual private cloud or VPC to ensure network isolation. Networking and VPC concepts are covered in a different video. AWS recommends you to place the ElastiCache instance inside a private subnet. You can further restrict access using security group which act as a firewall. ElastiCache also provides encryption at rest and in transit for both provisioned and serverless options. For Redis cluster, you can leverage IAM authentication for fine-grained role-based access control, which is available on Redis open source version 7 and above. And for ElastiCache Redis, you can use Redis Auth. Redis Auth refers to the authentication mechanism used to secure a Redis cluster. You can configure password or token to prevent unauthorized clients from accessing or modifying data inside the in-memory cluster. Now let's review the ElastiCache use cases, and to start with database caching. It can cache results from expensive database queries we have already reviewed in a previous slide. The other is session management, which stores user session data for scalability. We have reviewed this option as well in depth. Beyond database caching and session store, ElastiCache has many powerful use cases such as creating real-time leaderboards with Redis sorted sets. You can also build messaging queues or recommendations for your users. Based on your application nature, you can use any one of the caching pattern out of many available patterns. You need to remember these two patterns for the certification. To start with, lazy loading. This is also called cache aside. We have already reviewed lazy loading. This method is great for read-heavy workloads, but it can risk some data staleness. To eliminate the stale data problem, you can use a write-through strategy. In write-through strategy, every write operation is executed on both the cache and the database at the same time. While this technique keeps the cache and the database perfectly in sync, but it can introduce more write latency. Please select the pattern based on the scenario given during the certification, because each pattern has its own pros and cons. Now let's go back to AWS Management Console and let's review ElastiCache in action. Back to my AWS Management Console. To access ElastiCache from Service Search option, I'll type ElastiCache, the first service in the Service Search option. This is the dashboard of ElastiCache. From the left hand side, we have different cache engines. The first one is Velki Caches. This is the new offering, but this offering is not yet available for the AWS certification. Next, Memcached caches, and then we have Redis OSS cache. OSS means open source, because Redis has two different options. One is open source and enterprise. AWS uses Redis open source for this ElastiCache. Now let's create our first ElastiCache cluster and let's review different options. To create a new cluster, I'll click Get Started button. Here, in terms of configurations, we have three different engines: Velki, that is recommended, Memcached and Redis OSS. And it is saying you can save up to 33% with serverless and 20% with the node-based ElastiCache by choosing Velki. Velki is open source and AWS is recommending Velki. However, we are not going to choose Velki. We'll choose Redis OSS. Now, the moment we choose Redis OSS, we have serverless and node-based cache. We'll choose node-based. Now, under creation method, we have easy create, cluster create and restore from backup. The options are self-explanatory. I'll create cluster cache. I do not have a backup and I want to review all the available options. Now in the cluster mode, either you can enable the cluster or you can disable the cluster. If you enable the cluster mode, then you will have multiple shards. But if you will disable, you will only have a single shard. For this demo, I'll go with disable mode. I don't need cluster mode. Then the cluster information. Here you need to provide a name for this cluster. For the name, I am going to use CS ElastiCache Demo. You can choose any name up to 40 characters. The description, I am going to use Cloud Expert Solutions ElastiCache Demo. Again, description is optional. In terms of location, either you can place this into AWS Cloud or you can point to your own premises. I am going to choose AWS Cloud. In terms of multi-AZ, by default the multi-AZ is enabled. You can remove that multi-AZ. However, for the demo, let's select multi-AZ. And if you select multi-AZ, auto failover is enabled by default and you cannot disable. In terms of cache engine version, for Redis I have option from 7.1, which is the latest version. I also have some older versions. Unless and until your application has some dependency with the older Redis engine, it's better to choose the latest engine, because then you can use the Redis auth or the IAM authentication. I'll use 7.1. Port is by default, parameter group by default. Now here is the node type. You can choose different node types based on your memory requirement. Since this is going to be an in-memory cache, That is why RAM or memory is more important than the CPU requirement. You can choose whatever the size meets your demand. I am going to choose the large option. I believe this is the lowest possible configuration. Number of replicas, you can choose between 0 to 5. 0 means replica will not be enabled. For this demo, I am going to choose 0. In terms of connectivity, either you can choose IPv4 or dual stack or IPv6. I'll go with the default IPv4. Either you can choose an existing subnet group or you can create a new subnet group. I do not have existing subnets, that is why I can create a new subnet group. I am going to provide the name as CS Demo Redis Subnet and the description as Cloud Expert Solutions Redis Demo Subnet. You can choose whatever the name you want. In terms of VPC, I'll choose my existing VPC and here are the selected availability zones. Now tag for subnet group, that is optional, I don't want to. Availability zone placement, either you can place this in a specific availability zone or you can go with no preference. I do not have any preference because I do not have an application running. However, if you have any production application running in a specific availability zone, it's better to place this cache in the same subnet. I will proceed with no preference. Then I'll click next. I have changed that cluster name because that underscore character, it was not allowed. Now let's try to create. In terms of advanced settings, here you can enable encryption at rest. By default, it is enabled. However, you can disable that. I don't see a use case or why should I disable. That is why I'll proceed with enable. In terms of encryption key, you can go with the default key, which will be AWS own key and from your KMS, or you can create a customer managed key. I'll go with the default key. Encryption in transit, again enable by default. I'm fine with that. Access control, you can use auth default user access or user group access control list. Let's select auth default user access. Then I have to provide the auth token. I do not have any auth setting. That is why I'll go no access control. And then in terms of backup, I can enable automated backup. Backup retention period, you can choose between 1 day to 35 days. I'm fine with 1 day. Backup window, you can either specify a backup window or you can go with no preference. I'll go with the default option. In terms of maintenance window, I do not have any production workload. That's why I'll choose no preference. However, for your use case, I highly recommend you to choose any specific window. Let's proceed with no preference for this demo. And last, logs. Either you can enable the show log, engine logs. I do not need for this demo. Please remember, there is no free tier for ElastiCache, and if you are going to click next, AWS is going to charge you real money. I am going to cancel out this step because I wanted to review all such options. That wraps up this module. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more AWS exam preparation courses and cloud certification bootcamps. Got questions or feedback? Drop them in the comment. We love to hear from you. Thanks for learning with us at Cloud Expert Solutions. You are now one step closer to crushing your exam. See you in the next module.